Dr. Rupa Huq.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today marks a year to the day that the word Edward Colston first came across my consciousness, and no doubt many millions of others, when his statue in Bristol was ripped down from its plinth and rolled into the waters where his slave ships, I imagine, once docked in the wake of the brutal racist murder of George Floyd in the US. Events in Minneapolis reverberated everywhere. Copycat topplings ensued. In East London, the slaver Robert Milligan was preemptively removed by Tower Hamlets Council before any damage was done. And in Brussels, King Leopold, who oversaw genocide in the Congo, was dethroned. Confederate generals fell in Birmingham, that's Birmingham, Alabama, Portsmouth, Virginia, New South Wales, Australia, all providing a twist on UK geography. And the felling of Saddam Hussein in 2003 proves so memorable because statues confer respectability and they're highly symbolic. Nearly 40,000 individuals have signed, I think, 3 different petitions on the gov.uk website. So, you know, people do attach a lot of significance to them. And as for Colston, a man who made his wealth from trading in human beings and the enslavement of Africans literally in chains, he was once venerated as a benefactor to Bristol with a school and even a type of cake named after him. Where's he now? No longer imposing over the city centre with his watchful eye over everyone, but lying in a museum, literally horizontal in his graffitied, defaced state. Apparently, the damage done to his pedestal when the council fished him out of the river was so great that he couldn't sort of stand on his own weight anymore. But in some senses, let's think about this, it's far better as an educational tool that he is an exhibit furthering teaching rather than a figure that everyone used to walk past oblivious to. And, you know, the incident and its postscript of last year is history because Colston's latest chapter parallels how just outside here, off Central Lobby, Madam Deputy Speaker, there's the statue of Viscount Falkland, which is missing a foot spur. And the reason that is because it dates back to 1909 when a suffragette chained herself to his feet. And in the melee, when she was escorted off the premises by security, when the police came to take her away and she was crying, "Votes for women," all along the way, that spur snapped off. And that has sort of unintentionally become a symbol of feminism, giving people like you, me, the minister, hope that we might one day make it into a place like this. And, you know, it's always part of the Rupa tour, the unofficial tour that I give when I take constituents round. So, you know, and I also show people down in the dungeon the DIY plaque that Tony Benn screwed in there, I think with help of our former leader, the Right Honourable Member for Islington North. So, you know, that's a DIY plaque to Emily Wilding Davidson, another suffragette. So, you know, it's fitting in a way that the spray-painted version of Colston was never restored to its former glory, in the same way as that spike snapped off, because these were one-time acts of vandalism, but they now have become matters of historical record. And there's that larger-than-life Churchill out there, the entrance that us MPs all pass when we come in here. It was going a bit green, because of too many rubbings by MPs from the other side for good luck on the way in, and it now says "do not touch" affixed to it. The one outside Parliament Square was first, do you remember this, a year ago, boxed up and then very heavily guarded. People said he was the most guarded man in England last year for fear of being attacked by Black Lives Matter protesters. And, you know, in the event, it was a week ago that statue outside in Parliament Square had the words Chelsea daubed over it. Maybe, you know, security's eye was off the ball. They had won the some championship or other. And that's Chelsea fans. I think they're usually associated with the political right. Remember John Major? Remember the headhunters? So I think that shows how we can maybe imbue too much significance into these acts sometimes. And granted, there could be a bit of an evening up of the score for womankind, because it's shocking that only 2018, quite recently, if you consider that first arch dates back to when was it, 1080, the one at the beginning of Westminster Hall, First woman in the environs of Parliament, Millicent Fawcett, in 2018. So yeah, we could do better, and even up the score when up to now there was just an unofficial plaque in somewhere not on public view and a slap spur to represent womankind in this Parliament. And ditto with the BME figures. I know there was an almighty fight by a predecessor of mine, Lord Soley, to get a statue of Mary Seacole over the way at St Thomas's. But, you know, all these figures are quite complex. My late dad actually hated the Lord Clive one on Whitehall because of his corruption and imperial butchery. But at the same time, my dad was not a fan of Gandhi, who's one of the few colonial subjects who has a statue out there. And I can't quite remember why, or if I've misremembered, but he's not around to ask. And another joke of my dad's was British Museum. That's a funny word for something that all the stuff in there's nicked. So, yeah, British Museum. I certainly will.
I think that was an extra prompt there, I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, but anyway, the lady and I Honourable Lady and I had spoken beforehand. I very recently attended a meeting regarding the statue of Hans Sloane, the famous inventor of hot chocolate as well as advancements in medicine, and he was the son of Kitty Leigh in my constituency of Strangford. I found it incredible that his bust had been moved in the British Museum, especially considering that with a collection of 71,000 items which he bequeathed to the British Museum, or the British nation, thus providing the foundation of the British Museum, the British Library and the Natural History Museum in London. The fact that his wife was connected with a Caribbean plantation was enough to discredit entirely anything else. So does the Honourable Lady not agree that we must not seek to remove and dispose of our history, but rather allow it to have its place and seek to address where we as a nation are going as a matter of great importance? And I congratulate the Honourable Lady again on bringing this forward, and in the way she brings it forward as well. Thank you very much.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. What an honour it is to be intervened on him in an adjournment debate. I think this is a first for me. I think we've done it in Westminster Hall, but not in here. So, no, it's the first of many. It's the latest of many, many for him. But I'm on. It shows that I don't come up in the draw very often. But no, he makes a very good point, and I would say don't remove these statues, but contextualise them. And you know, again, busts, statues, they're maybe not what people would memorialise today. They do seem a little bit last century, or even the one before that. And I know that Mrs. Thatcher, God rest her soul, the one outside there, she didn't like it, actually. So, you know, they're not for everyone, but do keep them because they are a part of history and, you know, they need to be put in proper context. But, you know, again, I think the reason why statues are maybe less common now is that with the passage of time, we see what reputational damage can occur to individuals. Take, say, Winnie Mandela, or Sir Cyril Smith, or Prince Andrew, or Jimmy Savile. You know, if you had made statues to some of these individuals when they turned out to be not what they seemed afterwards. But look, what I understand is that direct action was resorted by the Bristolians because all the official channels they had been trying for years failed. And, you know, the minister will recognise that every local authority has much more complex and overflowing in-trays from hell, in-trays, in-boxes nowadays. So, you know, statue reappraisal probably was not top of the list of things for councils to be doing. But I think, you know, pandemic management, that was an unforeseeable that's occurred in the last 15 months. But, you know, many are now sort of reassessing these. London Borough of Ealing, for example, is doing that. And I say fine, as long as it's not a distraction from real reform. And, you know, to be fair, demolishing racism is going to be a lot harder than deracinating a statue. And I do think it's kind of simplistic to divide the world into heroes and villains, whereas all complex characters, like Churchill, were, you know, they had good and bad sides, and history does need to be taught warts and all. So, you know, we should not be blinded by hagiography. So we should teach, we will fight them on the beaches / our finest hour, but also the Bengal famine / Tony Pandy, rather than abridging or airbrushing out one side completely. But instead, I tend to feel recently that this sort of atmosphere of hysteria prevails. So I know there was a similar debate by another MP from that side in March that started off with the alarmist claim, Britain is under attack. And this is all because the London Mayor launched a Statues Commission to reassess past and present and future effigies. And it does sometimes feel like there's and I'm hoping the Minister will sort of allay my fears and put me at rest, that there's a confected culture war being waged. And some of the other elements of there include BBC bashing, obsessing about the Union Jack and how big it is in a Zoom call, laying into Meghan Markle, laying into taking the knee. And, sometimes some of these sort of straw men or bogey men or targets are imaginary as well, like the banning of Rule Britannia at last night of the proms, which apparently was never a consideration by the corporation. And the edict that Union flag should fly from all official buildings, to me feels a little bit un-British, because it's the kind of thing that you witness more in less self-assured recent states rather than a mature democracy like our own. And there used to be an old claim that, this country has lost an empire and is searching for a role. I feel that if we're kind of having to whip out the Union Jack at every moment, maybe that phrase is turning true. And news stories of Tory MPs insisting citizens must love the flag and Queen or move to another country, or even besmirching, as we know, the internationally revered Auntie Beeb because there aren't enough flags in its annual report. They do seem to be going down a sort of road of, totalitarian edicts. And after all, Churchill did defeat European fascism. And the prominence that statues have assumed in this war on the woke is seen by the way that they got additional protections in January with this sort of rushed legislation to necessitate planning consents for anyone who wants to mess with them. And the parallel was drawn, wasn't it, that when the minimum sentence for rape in the UK is 5 years, and it is double that in India, but for pulling down a statue you could get 10 years, it does imply that these sort of dead white men, mostly in bronze and stone, are valued over living, breathing women. And when the police crime sentencing and courts bill includes the word women 0 times in 295 pages, yet there are more mentions of statues, memorials, monuments than you can shake a stick at. The optics of it, shall we say, are bad. And no wonder that one female wag, following the tragic murder of Sarah Everard, tweeted, "I think I'll just dress as a statue, because that way someone might take my safety seriously." It's not just the lifeless immortalised as statues that are contested in this struggle. The Crusaders who feel under threat, and they play to some sort of imagined gallery of statue lovers who wrap themselves up in the Union Jack, are also promising a purge on progressives on boards. And we know the BBC has an ex-Tory candidate at the helm, but it seems a bit sinister that he's sort of saying that he wants to silence contributors from having opinions on social media. And we do know that there was a DCMS secretary seminar in February for 25 organisations to set out the government-approved version of Britain's past. And it was trailed in the Telegraph with his words, "to defend our culture and history from the noisy minority of activists who constantly try to do Britain down." Again, it sounds alarmist. Who does he mean? Chelsea fans? And the meeting, there's slight secrecy around it. It wasn't... the attendees' agenda and discussions were not published. And I know certain people like the Council for British Archaeology, the rank-and-file archaeologists, were annoyed they didn't get an invite. So if that's repeated again, it'd be good to broaden the audience list. And it does feel a slightly unedifying spectacle when 50 MPs called the Common Sense Group go on the offensive as government outriders, maybe, attacking the National Trust and Leicester University's Professor Corinne Fowler for their joint research uncovering that nearly 100 trust properties have sort of slave wealth behind them, because it feels like an attack on academic freedom, and it does feel like the opposite of common sense. Crucially, wider heritage assets too need protection, not from lynch mobs, but from the developer's bulldozer. Public buildings and land are increasingly being flogged off to the highest builder by cash-strapped councils, meaning that we have vanishing community centres, libraries, playgrounds, and council houses that were sold off under right to buy are now in the hands of private landlords who pocket housing benefit bills footed by local authorities. And, this cycle of slum landlords that council houses were meant to end continues. And, it seems sad that what was founded for public good is being turned into private profit. When my office diaried in Acton Town Hall opening for me, I had to explain to them that, it's not a civic structure, but we have this sort of grand 1910 founded building where the Clash played. It was being reborn as apartments behind the original facade. I think they did some add-on ones that didn't quite work and some dodgy conversions, and now I get emails all the time about things, quite basic things like the waterworks do not function, so too big to be snagging. And I felt, I marvelled at the refurb because it looked shiny, but at the same time I felt a twinge of sadness, really. So if you're watching One Housing, sort it out! And, next on the list of lost municipal heritage, next on the hit list in Ealing, we've got a car park and an 80s council office building set to be flattened and replaced by 477, mostly private sale flats in 7 towers. And the highest will be a most un-Ealing 26 stories. We have a 1800s Gothic town hall. It's often used actually in shoots that pretend to be the House of Commons because it's got those same archy bits. The architecture's quite similar. Anyway, that's going to be overshadowed by this hideous thing. And there was a Times article, I don't know if you saw it, at the weekend, which was called "Our Cities Gained Riches But Lost Their Soul" on similar developments. And in it sort of observed that there's always this statutory, separate, affordable bit of these schemes, but it's always begrudged and bartered down by greedy developers. And I feel in this case they're stretching the definition of affordable because you have to be on 58k to get one of these, the 3-bedroom version, the family-sized. But if you're on 60, you're ineligible. So, I'm hoping that's actually the Minister's colleague from MHCLG can exercise call-in powers before our skyline's ruined forever. But, there are many, many examples of where local authorities have been forced to do this. That same Gothic town hall is going to be leased to a hotel chain because those people will foot the repair bill. And I feel it is, to quote actually Macmillan, literally selling off the family silver to the highest builder. And, the end product often marketed to overseas buyers when Ealing itself has a 5-figure council waiting list of local families. Notwithstanding sort of post-Grenfell fears of tall buildings, perhaps surprisingly, of over 500 high-rise buildings in London granted planning permission or begun construction last year, a whopping 215, nearly half of those are in outer boroughs. And the current planning system, which incentivises high densification development in proximity to rail hubs, I would say needs rethinking in light of the fact that people are now choosing accommodation over location, with white-collar home working the new norm, at least for part of the week, as a lasting post-COVID effect. And in the meantime, the very character, I keep quoting Tory Prime Minister, John Major. John Major talked about invincible green suburbs, and he talked about them approvingly alongside warm beer and dog walkers as epitomising Englishness. And I feel that, this is in danger of being lost, particularly somewhere like Ealing, which was long known as Queen of the Suburbs. Moreover, the government's decided that London is not on a Tory target list, so levelling up does not apply. It's exempt from the Towns Fund, overlooking the fact that the capital is where inequalities are starkest, where deprivation is deepest, and poverty is worst within the UK and between London's constituent bits. There's enormous diversity within. A decade of decline in local infrastructure has left scarring effects like youth stabbings with closed youth clubs. Sadly, at times it feels that this government is sort of hell-bent on an anti-woke crusade of knee-jerk populist bandwagoneering. It looks like pandering, with the square root being what they think will deflect from any mistakes and win votes. And we've seen it again today with the aid cuts. I know we're having an SO24 tomorrow, there is no vote. But the claim of 0.7%, which Conservatives created that after all, and they pledged not only in their manifesto but as recently as the DFID FCO merger in September that would be safe. Gone. And the Culture Secretary from his most recent interviews is vowing to have more statues erected to unspecified British heroes, blocking what he sees as a kind of Britain-hating, statue-toppling metropolitan bubble that control cultural institutions, and he wants to replace them with red wall voters in the latest war on the woke, front battle, cultural cleansing, whatever we call it. Again, it looks like government interference in a traditionally independent sector motivated by electoral calculation. Ditto, I think people are saying the same of today's cricket controversy. So anyway, I have some asks for the Minister, and she'll be relieved to know I will be ending after that. So it's a kind of top 10. So first, the expression not set in stone should apply, in that we should not be afraid to revisit, reinterpret, reevaluate what's been handed down by previous generations. Reputations have proved foolproof, so it pays to future-proof. And, you know, the London Mayor's Commission, I feel, is a positive thing, because that way future monuments are in sympathy with architectural surroundings, you know, not just always creepy human forms, which I understand actually the Holocaust Memorial will be a geometric design. And sometimes the enormity of a situation outweighs one individual. So again, on the other side of the river, we have the COVID memorial wall. And I know that my honourable friends for Gorton, Manchester, Gorton and Vauxhall are campaigning to make that permanent. So I would say that's a good plan and make a plea to the Minister there. Secondly, I'd say putting things in context, e.g. in museums with explanatory notes, is preferable to unthinking idolatry and glorification of individuals. Third, public sector equality duty should be given due regard in planning decisions. 4, goodies versus baddies, London versus Red Wall, saints versus sinners is divisive and makes everything too binary. Richard III still has numerous statues everywhere, despite being a complete rotter, the princes in the tower. But, you know, and when his remains were found under a car park in Leicester, he received a lavish reburial with the whole great and the good turning out, Benedict Cumberbatch and people like this. So that renewed his memorialisation. But, you know, I would never protest any of that, because heritage and history are crucially contested. There's not one version of the past. So what I'd say to the Minister on this one is more emphasis on critical thinking in humanities and history, which do seem to have been a little bit defavoured in the curriculum in favour of numeracy and literacy of late. 5, halfway through, more flexibility, including recognition that we don't have to just always think of removal versus retention. There's also another option, which is relocation. In Prague and Oslo, they have statue parks, so if you like to look at these things, you can look at a whole load of them at once. And, you know, closer to home, we have the 4th plinth as well. So, you know, these kind of things are a more adaptable way of either pull them down or stick them up or whatever. Relocate or, you know, flexible options is another option. Number 6, less short-term reactive policy driven by jingoistic stirring up popular sentiment. Stirring up popular sentiment and more cool-headed longitudinal assessment and recognition of London boroughs as needing investment as well, not just places that are electorally useful for the current government. 7, reverse the willful neglect of local government from Whitehall. Council shouldn't be forced into desperate measures. And as I say, ministerial intervention on the planning issue I flagged would save Ealing's very municipal heart and legacy from being overrun by development. Forcing local authorities to be self-financing is unrealistic given the range of services now at their door. And the biggest one of those is, of course, the social care bill, which I think we're still missing the Prime Minister's plan for it. We were promised that quite a long time ago. If the Minister has any clues, we'd be grateful. I'd also say penultimate one, central government leadership is needed on tall buildings to prohibit over-densification of suburban locations in the same way as the Green Belt limited the overspill of cities into the countryside. Ealing, Brent, Croydon and Barnet are the worst offenders of this kind of sky's the limit attitude with tower building in recent years. And lastly, local communities should be genuinely involved in decision-making. Whilst the Colston scenes were exciting to witness, in fact I have an extra one, I'm just going to add it. The Colston scenes were exciting to witness and the episode was a catalyst, but you know, better frameworks and public inquiry should exist to achieve this end result and indeed listing or delisting buildings. And lastly, I guess we should never look at the statues as a, you know, as a substitute for really tackling the real issues of inequalities, that really would be levelling up. I look forward to hearing what the Minister says.